Hi, I'm Erica Mills. Welcome to this edition of the CLAXON CAM. Now here at CLAXON, we spend a lot of time talking about language. Turns out that language is only 7% of what people understand or interpret you to be saying. So the other 93% has a really fancy term called paralanguage, commonly referred to as nonverbal communication. Right? This is our body language, our facial expression, our tone of voice. All of these things come together, and they infuse those words with meaning. So I want you to pay attention as you go forward this month to your paralanguage. I know you're probably falling out of your chairs because I'm all about that 7% most of the time. What are the words and finding the right word, and that is important. But it can't be important to the exclusion of this other 93%, right? Because that's a lot of meaning. So let me give you an example. Back in the day, I worked at the University of British Columbia, and my boss was Dan Gardner. Dan's a great guy. And he made a very interesting observation one day. Dan was not having a very good day. He was having a bad day. And as he, ran into people in the hallways and they passed, they'd say, "Hey, how you doing, Dan?" He'd say, "Yeah, not that good." I'd go, "Oh, yeah, okay, how you doing?" And so it went, and this happened 2 or 3 times where he said, "Not very good." And the exchange or the reaction wasn't to pause and say, "Oh, yeah, what's going on?" They just sort of kept going. So what was happening in that moment? There's a disconnect between words and meaning, between the language and the paralanguage. The words that they probably should have chosen were hi, hello, hey Dan, something along those lines. But instead they were saying, "How are you?" Right? So in that tone of voice, they did communicate a lot, and in their body language, which was they didn't really want to hear how Dan was doing. Poor Dan. They didn't want to hear how Dan was doing. They just wanted to acknowledge him and keep moving along. Now, juxtapose that to if someone had sat down and looked at Dan and said, "Dan, how are you? How are you?" They're the exact same words. But when somebody sits down and they look you right in the eye and they ask you those types of things, that's a completely different thing, right? In that case, the language, the words, totally aligned with the paralanguage, the meaning, right? So let's think about a little bit how you can bring continuity to your language and paralanguage. And as you're talking to people who care about your cause, your donors, your volunteers, your advocates, your fans, see how often what you're saying is or is not in alignment with the meaning. Try to make some small changes. What's the difference if you lean in versus if you're sort of sitting back? What does that communicate? And as you make adjustments, notice the reaction of the people that you're talking to. See how it goes. Let me know, and I will look forward to seeing you next month.